So get this. Donald Trump said, "My own morality, my own mind is the only thing that can stop me." And in the same interview, he also said, "I don't need international law." That's the President of the United States saying out loud that there are no real limits on him. Not the courts, not Congress, not even international law.
This isn't some social experiment anymore where we all sit around asking how far Trump and MAGA can push the boundaries. We got our answer already. Congress, the Senate, and a lot of world leaders are clearly prepared to let him go much farther than anyone should be comfortable with.
And when the New York Times asked him a straight question, what matters more, preserving NATO or grabbing Greenland? He didn't shut it down. No, he said, it may be a choice between the two.
We all know the cartoon version of Trump, the orange clown who bankrupts casinos, gets convicted, and brags about sexually assaulting women like it's a joke. And somehow, he still ended up in the White House. Twice. And now that same guy is speaking from a position of power, a convicted felon in the Oval Office.
And that same grifter playboy wannabe now gets to talk seriously about owning Greenland, a territory of a NATO ally, and decide whether an alliance built out of blood, sweat, and actual graves survives his ego.
And all of this matters because Greenland isn't just some empty square on a risk board. It has people, history, elections, and the right to self-determination, which is why Greenland's political leaders have been blunt. They don't want to be Americans, and Greenland's future is for Greenlanders to decide.
Denmark's Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen gave a warning that should be ringing the fire alarm for everyone. If the U.S. attacks another NATO country militarily, everything stops, including NATO. Because you can't have a defense alliance where the biggest member says, "I might invade the other members."
And Europe is reacting like it understands the stakes. Reuters reported that European leaders, along with Mark Carney, have pushed back and emphasized that decisions about Greenland belong to Denmark and Greenland, not Washington.
And yet, now Trump says the U.S. needs to own Greenland to deter Russia and China. That's not a strategy. If your real concern is Russia, the last thing you should do is blow up the alliance that keeps Russia in check. The only country that benefits from a fractured NATO is Russia.
So why Greenland anyway? Why this island at the top of the world?
Well, the White House dresses it up as national security. Radar, missiles, Arctic routes, deterring Russia and China. But every time they talk about it, they keep circling back to the same thing. Resources. Oil, gas, and especially rare earth minerals.
Yeah, because here's the bait. Greenland is estimated to hold roughly 35 to 42 million metric tons of rare earth minerals and oxides. That is huge. But here's what they don't put in that campaign clip of theirs. China processes nearly 90% of the world's rare earth supply. So even if you control what's in the ground, you still need the supply chain that turns it into something useful. And right now, that runs straight through Beijing.
And building mines and processing in the U.S., that's not quick either. One major explainer notes average U.S. mine development timelines are around 29 years, plus the years to permit and license refining.
So Trump's supposed big win is to crack NATO right now for minerals that the U.S. can't even properly use for years. That's not strategy. That's reckless bravado with a map and a Sharpie in his hand. And it's certainly helping Putin right now.
Yep. And remember, though, Europe isn't powerless here. Europe has serious financial and market muscle. It doesn't have to shout back at Trump to hit back. It can just make his choices more expensive, step by step, using rules that it already controls.
The European banking system alone is measured in the tens of trillions of euros. However you slice it, you're talking about one of the biggest pools of capital on Earth. That money decides which projects get financed, which companies get credit, and which bonds get bought.
And remember, the euro isn't some side currency either. It's the second biggest reserve currency in the world. If European regulators and banks start making life harder for American firms, those companies feel it in their borrowing costs, their access to credit, their ability to raise money.
On top of that, Europe writes a lot of rules that global companies already have to live by. Think about data rules, privacy rules, tech rules. If Brussels decide that certain American companies need extra scrutiny because Washington is busy threatening allies, that's time, money, and lawyers for every firm caught in that net.
And the EU is a market American companies rely on. U.S. tech, pharma, finance, manufacturing, defense contractors, they all depend on European customers and European approvals. So there's a real question here. How long do U.S. corporations stay quiet if Europe starts tightening the screws through regulations, contracts, and who gets access to which markets?
Europe doesn't even have to announce some dramatic embargo to send a message either. It can quietly shift contracts away from U.S. suppliers, speed up approvals for Canadian or Asian firms, slow down approvals for American ones, and let the quarterly earnings report do the talking.
Which is why Trump picking a fight with Europe over Greenland is just so backwards. He's threatening countries that control a 19 trillion euro economy and a giant financial system, just so that he can go on a rant about owning an island his own experts say he can't fully exploit for years.
That's why this goes way beyond Greenland. This is about whether the rules-based system survives a U.S. president who is openly flirting with taking territory from an ally.
When a leader tells you the only limit on his actions are his morality, that's not comforting. No, that's a warning label. We just saw what his morality looks like in Minneapolis with Renee Nicole Good, right? Do we really want that morality deciding borders in the Arctic?
And then you get the deputies going out to sell it all. Stephen Miller goes on TV and shouts out loud, "We're a superpower. We're going to act like a superpower. It's our hemisphere. Damn straight we went into Venezuela." No apology, no humility, just we have the power, so we will use that power.
He literally ties it back to the Monroe Doctrine, and obviously the so-called Donroe Doctrine. The idea that the whole Western Hemisphere, from the Arctic to the tip of South America, is their backyard. If a country has resources that Washington wants, or does business with the wrong partners, it's now treated as a potential enemy, not a sovereign state.
Bob Ray looked at all of this and said the part that Canadians really don't want to hear, but we need to. He said Canadians would be wrong to think that we're not on the menu, that the Trump administration doesn't take our sovereignty seriously. It's not just Venezuela or Greenland, it's Canada too.
And he didn't say this as some internet commentator. He said it as Canada's former ambassador to the United Nations. He called this an existential challenge. He said it's the most serious situation that Canada has faced since the Second World War. That's how high he thinks the stakes are.
And he described the pattern. Go in with military force or threats, create a crisis, then grab the resources. He called it gunboat diplomacy. He said it's about using power to exclude people from their own land and extract the wealth for yourself.
Which is exactly why this "we need to own Greenland for national security" line doesn't even pass the laugh test. If the real goal was security, you'd work with NATO, with Denmark, with Greenland, with Canada, with Europe. But that's not what's happening. The language is all about control and possession.
We're already seeing that being put in motion in Venezuela. Trump has said, we own the country, we own the oil, and we get the money.
Which is exactly why this "we need to own Greenland for national security" line, it doesn't even pass the laugh test. If the real goal was security, you know what you do? You'd work with NATO, Denmark, with Greenland, with Canada, with Europe. But that is definitely not what's happening. This language is all about control and possession and about who owns what. If the United States decides it can tear up the rules to take a chunk out of a NATO ally, what exactly is the argument against Russia in Ukraine?
What do you say to Taiwan if China decides to follow the same logic? If Trump normalizes the idea that big powers can grab territory because they can or feel entitled to it? Well, he's not just putting Greenland at risk, he's handing every authoritarian leader on Earth a talking point. Which is why Ray keeps going back to Canada needing to get its house in order. Removing barriers inside our own economy so we're not so easy to bully. It needs to happen like yesterday. We need to double down on non-US trade so we're not dependent on one neighbor that's talking about owning chunks of our map. And we need to build deeper ties with Europe and Asia so we have options.
And at the same time, He's blunt about what this says about the US as well. He says a US incursion into Greenland would do enormous reputational damage. It would tell the world that Washington is no longer even pretending to respect sovereignty, that it's willing to act more like an empire than an ally. And it's not like Washington has always respected our claims up there either. The US already refuses to recognize the Northwest Passage as Canadian waters. They call it an international strait. They've pushed back on our control over key passages off our own coast. They've already dropped hints about our watersheds and our lakes as strategic resources. So when they start talking about owning territory, you have to ask, what or who is next? So I guess the question here is, what do we do about it, right? It's not enough to point at Trump and say, wow, that's bad. We actually have to decide how Canada reacts.
Well, right now, Mark Carney is heading to China trying to build trade and diplomatic options so that we're not trapped by one angry neighbor. That's really smart, diversifying trade, strengthening alliances, and showing that we have other partners. But it's not the whole answer. Canadians, I think, we need to hear directly that we're not going to face this alone and in the dark.
Yeah, I'd love to see a primetime address where he spells it out. Tell people clearly that NATO still matters. Tell them that if Trump crosses certain lines, Europe and the UK and the rest of the alliance won't just look at their shoes. And tell Canadians that our Arctic sovereignty is not up for negotiation.
Because Bob Ray is right about one thing. If this is the biggest challenge we've faced since the Second World War, the Canadians deserve more than background quotes and careful wording. We deserve to know who has our back, what the red lines are, and what the plan is if Trump decides that Greenland isn't enough.
And Canada's job, at its core, it sounds simple even if it isn't. Stand up for sovereignty. Actually show up in our own Arctic so no one can claim that we were absent. And stay locked in with allies who still believe that borders aren't something that you grab just because you feel like it.
Because if the U.S. can threaten to take Greenland, territory tied to NATO, and the alliance just shrugs and carries on, then what is the point of any mutual defense at all?
And if the only thing stopping a president is his morality, then the world needs something a lot stronger than his conscience to lean on. It needs countries, including Canada, willing to say, no, this stops right here.
So tell us what you think in the comments. Should NATO countries spell out real consequences now before this turns into a full-blown crisis? Should Prime Minister Carney be speaking directly to Canadians now about what happens if Trump pushes this further?
And if you want more breakdowns like this, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and share this with the one person in your life who still thinks that it's just tough talk and nothing more.
So thanks for watching, and remember, if you want to support our channel, you can join the A-Team and even grab some merch that we've got for sale. Like these t-shirts, they're pretty cool.
They really are. And if you want something a little more in-depth, head over to Substack at Unfiltered North. Follow us over there. We do lots of deep dives over there. It's all text-based, so if you don't want to watch video, that's the place for you.
We'll see you tomorrow, everyone.
Thanks for watching. Ciao for now.